Hello, Acolytes. Welcome back to After Plague and welcome to Inktober. Have you ever had a dream that was so good that you never ever wanted to wake up? That is the idea behind day one's illustration, Dream. I started this illustration on stream. I stream on Twitch sometimes. By the time this video comes out, I think I'll be done streaming Inktober, so you'll have to catch me for something else. I am After Plague on Twitch. But my thought was, if you had a dream that was so great that you didn't want to wake up, your body naturally has to wake up. Like it has to. You can't stay asleep. Unless you could maybe force yourself to stay asleep, to stay still, to stay with your eyes closed. So I drew this woman who has her eyes and mouth sewn shut, essentially, so that she can stay in this dream forever. And I thought, there's got to be something in this dream that's drawing her in, some sort of entity, some sort of creature. So I came up with this woman that appears in the dreams. And essentially, the story behind this illustration is that a lot of people, this is sort of an endemic, a pandemic, where a lot of people are, being taken to hospitals and they've got their eyes and mouths sewn shut, and they just keep talking about this lady that they're seeing in their dreams. And essentially, there's this entity that makes dreams so appealing that you want to stay in them forever. As for the illustration itself, I started out with this sort of smoother brush, this smoother inking brush, and I decided it was something that I didn't really like the texture of, because I really enjoyed the texture that was in the underlying pencil lines. So instead, I decided to convert those lines to black and white, and then use a much rougher brush. I was using the dry ink brush on Procreate, and that gave it just a ton more texture. It made it feel less clean and a bit more visceral, which is definitely something that I think this illustration needed, because it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to look at. When I was on stream and trying to look up references for the whole eye situation, I was not quite traumatized, but I would say pretty close. I was very uncomfortable. So I wanted to keep that visceral nature in the inking, but it would have taken too long to do with a smoother brush. So by switching to a rougher brush, it definitely gives me the ability to lean into that roughness a little bit earlier. For those who might not know, I make and sell an Inktober collection of short stories included with these images. So if you would like to know more about these images, if you would like to know more background, if you would like something sort of a spooky coffee table book for this season, for this Halloween season, my Inktober book is releasing on October 14th at my website, afterplagueart.myshopify.com. If you would go and support that, I would really, really appreciate it. It means a lot to me, and I've put a lot of effort into my short stories. I hope you guys like them, and I would love to hear any feedback. So the woman in the dreams, she's referred to as the crying woman. These people, they go into the dreams and they see her, and she's sobbing, and she's so beautiful and so ethereal and so almost unattainable that they feel like they have to stay in the dream. They want to comfort her. They want to be with her forever, and they feel drawn to her. They just go into this sort of manic state where they sew their eyes shut, and then their mind and body kind of disconnect from each other, essentially. So their mind wants to stay asleep, wants to stay in the dream, but their body knows, like, hey, this isn't good for me and I need to wake up. And so their body will start like jerking, or they'll start making noises in their sleep, and it will wake them from sleeping. So they do these things like not eating so that their body grows really weak and they can't move, or they'll sew their mouth shut so that they can't yell and make noise. And in that way, they can stay in this dream forever. But nobody really knows the true nature. Nobody really knows what's going on entirely with the crying woman. I really had a ton of fun with this illustration. It was a great way to start off Inktober, and it really set the tone for my illustrations. They all are quite dark, and they stay sort of this gruesome throughout the month, so I'm very pleased with that. So this is day one of Inktober, Dream. Migraines suck, and I sometimes feel like I could just rip my head open to try and find the cause of what is going on in my head that's causing these migraines. But I think if I saw day 2's prompt, spiders, when I looked for the solution, I would rather have not looked at all. So this story is about a woman who is having just this awful headache. It's giving her like brain fog and everything. She can't think for the life of her. And she just goes to a bunch of doctors. She tries a bunch of different medicines and home remedies, and nothing is working. She keeps feeling this like pain, this awful migraine behind her eye. So eventually, when the pain gets just completely unbearable, she looks in the mirror and she sees crawling out from under her eyelid the long, spindly, disgusting legs of a spider. So this one is just sort of classic, like, what if bugs laid eggs in your ears, Which is sort of a fear I feel like everybody has had at one point. For a lot of these Inktober illustrations, I wanted to lean into fears or nightmares that I personally have had, and I really don't like the idea of bugs, parasites, embedding themselves in your skin, in your head, in your brain. Unfortunately, it's a thing that happens. Not with a lot of bugs, but with some, and I really hate the idea of that. So I wanted to also make you hate the idea of that by really leaning into the absurdist almost with this. Like, how could there be a fully grown spider behind your eye? But it's almost like that same fear, like, how could there be a shark in the swimming pool? It's still there for some people, and I wanted to lean into that. So this one, I had a lot of fun trying to really get the texture of that like pulled eye into the illustration. That's not something I've ever illustrated before. It's not something I've ever drawn. And it was very interesting to think about like where the tension was, where the fingers were pulling on the tension, and how that would affect the shape of the eye, how that would affect the wrinkles of the eye. And I think it turned out really good. I'm really pleased with how the hatching looks on this one and how it builds on the form underneath it. So I'm quite pleased with that. It was a little bit difficult trying to figure out how to position her hand above her eye, because I was looking at myself in the mirror and I was like, I don't know if this is correct. I'm just not 100% sure, but I think it looks natural enough that one could probably just accept it and not think too hard about it. Because this illustration was slightly simpler, it took me a little bit less time than day 1. Day 1 took me about 4 hours and 5 minutes, and day 2 took me about 2 hours and 45 minutes, which is definitely on the low end of the Inktober illustrations I have done. This one did go by pretty quickly, and it was also pretty enjoyable, so I was very pleased about that. It's mostly because it's basically just a portrait of a person, and so there wasn't a lot of background elements, there weren't a lot of things I didn't know how to draw. The spiders were a little challenging, only because, I wanted to make sure I made them look sort of shiny, and the one that's in her eye does get a little bit lost with her pupil, but I also think that that's quite interesting, that it sort of blends in to look like the pupil is the head of the spider, so it almost implies that the spider is like a part of her, and I really do like that, actually. I find that quite fascinating. This spider on her cheek was also a little bit challenging, because I had to like try and make their legs look long and spindly, and like the spider was suspended, like not laying flat on her face, because spiders stand on the tips of their fingers? Legs? I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, I had to try and make him look like he was standing a little bit tall, so I really did need the shadows underneath his legs to sell that. The hatching on her hands was also quite time consuming, but I think it looked pretty good, so I was okay with it taking a little bit of time. I eventually blacked out that section under her neck to make it, like look like it's really in shadow. But I didn't like how much she just looked like a floating head, so I decided to go in and just sort of hatch it and shade it and make it look a little bit less full coverage. So that is day 2, spiders. Do you have a headache now? If you do, I'm sorry. There are some locations that are scary even in the middle of the day, and one of those is a long, winding path through the forest. So day 3, the prompt word was path, And this one took me quite a long time. This one took me 4 hours and 45 minutes. But basically, the story of this path is that you can walk down the path just fine. You're not going to be harmed, you're not going to be hurt. But if you step off the path, then you will become absorbed into the forest. You'll become one of the trees, you'll become part of the nature, and you'll be trapped there forever, growing into the roots of the path. Though you might be careful and you might not step off the path. The path does kind of want more trees, so it has all of these like tendrils and vines that reach out from the brush to try and grab you, trip you, and drag you into the dark forest. I would not walk down this path. This one I definitely had some trouble with, so if you notice some like skipping in different stages of the illustration, it's because it took me a long time and I was really struggling because I don't draw a lot of environments, especially forested environments, because I don't know how to ink them, essentially. I don't know how to draw it without it taking forever. I know there's ways to do it in sort of a painterly style that don't take very long, but inking wise, I just feel like it takes so long and you need so much detail to make it look good that I typically don't draw foresty environments. But I thought I liked this idea too much of the haunted trees to really avoid it too much. So a big majority of my time on this illustration was just spent trying to create the proper amount of contrast between the elements that are in the foreground, the elements that are in the background, between the trees and the bushes, between the path and the leaves on the sides of the path. It really just was a lot of going over the same areas and being like, this needs to be darker, this needs to be darker. This is the first illustration that I did not have fun with. It was pretty fun at the start, sketching and all of that, and then when I got into the inking, I'm like, man, I do not want to be doing this. So this one really gave me some trouble, but I do think it turned out looking pretty good. It's not my favorite, but I think it looks pretty good. If you want to buy any of these illustrations as prints, they should be up on my website right now. Gonna plug it again, afterplagueart.myshopify.com. These prints should be available in a variety of sizes, starting at like $15 or $20. So if you do decide to get yourself a print, please at me, tag me, whatever, when it arrives. I would love, love, love to see what you've got. I really want to see the quality of the posters. I would love to see somebody purchase my stuff. So no pressure, only if you can afford it. But if you would like to get one of these illustrations as a poster, please go to my website. The link is in the description and also on the screen now. You can't click it, but that's the website. Something that I was pretty unsure of while I was doing this illustration was how I was going to do the leaf cover, the foliage at the top of the trees, because I knew that I didn't want to black it out completely. That was my initial thought, was like, oh, I'll just black it out completely and then you'll only be able to see the tree branches. But the more I thought about that, the more I thought like, this doesn't really make sense. So I did several layers of building up the color, building up these sort of poofy shapes, is that what I'm trying to say? The rounded shapes that leaves make. And then at the end I went in with a brush and just made a whole bunch of little leaf imprints, like individual leaves in the tree branches. At times in this illustration, I feel like it's hard to see what I'm doing. When I'm looking back at the footage, I can't even see what I'm doing because I'm going over the same areas so many times. So I don't blame you if this one is hard for you to keep up with, because it's hard for me to keep up with. I do really like the foreground element of that one guy in the tree, the one skull in the tree, and his like arm reaching up into the foliage. And then there's also the woman who's reaching across the path. Those hands would also grab at you, pull at your clothes as you're walking down the path, trying to make you join them and come into the path, come into the forest, that is. I do think that I ended up with an okay balance of contrast by the end of this, which was really what I was struggling with, because depth of field is difficult because things further away are lighter atmospherically, but they would be darker and to make the illustration more understandable, right? The thing that's closest to you is the thing you're going to be able to see the most detail on. So things that are further away would be darker, but not atmospherically. This is why environments are so confusing to me, is because I'm not exactly sure the contrast of different environments. I understand that atmospherically for things like mountains and clouds and buildings, that further away they're going to get lighter. I don't know if that only applies to large structures though. I'm not sure if it applies to trees, so I gotta do some research. Something else that I feel like maybe doesn't come through perfectly in this illustration, but is sort of a fun little hidden Easter egg, kinda. It's not supposed to be an Easter egg, but I feel like it's not super visible, is the guy's hand. You can see that on like the right side of the illustration. His hand is wrapped up with a vine and he's being dragged into that thick layer of underbrush. So the path has claimed somebody. But yeah, basically just continuing to add contrast, continuing to add individual leaves, individual, bushels on the bushes and gatherings of leaves on the ground. And that is basically the end of the illustration there. So this is day 3, path. I feel like there's an abandoned house in every single neighborhood that everybody just kind of agrees is a little bit creepy. I remember when I was younger, there was this house a couple doors down that was abandoned, and we would go and look in the windows and see how dark it was, and their pool was completely filled with algae, and it was kind of scary, and the neighborhood kids would dare each other to go into the house, but obviously it was locked. I was always too scared to go in anyway. But there are some abandoned houses that are creepier than others, and maybe there's a reason that you should stay out of some abandoned houses, which is the story for day 4, Dodge. This illustration took me just about 4 hours. It was 3 hours and 50 minutes. And I could not come up with what I wanted to do for this one for the longest time. It felt like a very difficult prompt word, even though it's quite an easy word to come up with ideas for. It's just none of them felt horrible enough for me. But I decided that maybe if somebody went into this sort of abandoned house, they would have to dodge and duck their way out of it, and they would just barely escape with their life, or maybe their eyeballs still intact. So I wanted to make it so that this person is standing very quietly while something is reaching for them, grabbing them, and they're just barely out of reach, just barely dodging the grip. And I feel like that turned out really well in terms of like a horror take on the word dodge. I really like this one. I feel like I captured her fear pretty well. I really like that I was able to capture that facial expression. And I wanted to add something else in the background of the illustration to imply danger, not just the hand, because I feel like, the hand just looks like a hand with sort of sharp nails. So I made all of these eyes peeping through the darkness of the doorway. So that either implies that there's a lot of people in the house, or there's one thing with a lot of eyes that don't necessarily make sense in terms of location. So I think that this is probably a creature that captures people that come into the haunted house, and it somehow takes their eyes from them, either literally physically or metaphorically, and sort of adds it to its total collection of eyes. Again, if you want to read the short stories that I came up with for these illustrations, if any of these premises sound interesting to you, you'll want to go to my shop, afterplagueart.myshopify.com, bookmark it, and come back on October 14th. The book is launching on October 14th. It's going to be quite a long book. It's going to be about the size of a novel. It's going to be at least 200 pages long and include all 31 illustrations. So if you buy it on the 14th, you get a sneak peek of what my illustrations look like for the rest of the month, because you'll be getting them ahead of everybody else. And you'll get to read 31 unique short stories about each of the illustrations. So if you'd like to check that out, go ahead and click the link in the description. I gotta plug it. I know that people don't like when I plug stuff, but I worked really, really hard on these, and I really, really want to make sure that you guys get to see. I want to make sure you have the opportunity to read it. So yeah, go check that out if you can. This illustration, a lot of it it was sort of not background work, I would say, but I've been drawing quite a few environments for these illustrations. Oftentimes I'm just drawing somebody or something sort of floating in a space or with a very easy background. But with these illustrations, I felt like the background was necessary to build suspense, to build drama, to really make you, engaged in what was going on in the illustration. So I had to draw this window, and the wood grain on the boards was a lot. It was a lot, and it was not the first time that I had to draw wood grain this month. I drew these kind of out of order. I'll tell you a quick little story about how I drew these. I got stuck on Dodge. I was on Dodge, and I got stuck, and I had no ideas for what I wanted to do, but I had ideas for other illustrations. So instead of staying stuck and just ruminating, I bounced all around Inktober to every idea that I had. And then, when I had completed all of the illustrations that I had ideas for, I put the rest of them in a wheel, and I spun the wheel, and each day that was the one that I would work on. So, I was eventually forced to work on Dodge by the wheel when I finally had an idea. But I had drawn wood grain for some of the other illustrations, and I was getting to the point where I was like, I should just make a brush, because it's fine to do it once. I do it once in the sketch, and then I have to do it and go over it again with the ink pens, which is really where the whole drama of it all comes in. But I gotta do it. You really notice the difference between the beginning and the end. And I also really... I was struggling with these boards because the illustration, the image I was looking at, it wasn't an illustration. The reference image I was looking at, the boards were fake decorative boards for like Halloween. And so they looked really fake and pasted on. And I was really struggling with making these boards look a little bit more realistic than the Halloween pasted on ones. I still think that they are kind of, a little cartoony, but in illustration, it matters like what the intent is, not necessarily, in illustration, it matters what the final perception is, not necessarily the realism of it all. You'll have to excuse me, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I've been streaming for hours and hours and hours on Twitch. But I think at this point I'm on vacation. If I'm not, then I'm way, way behind schedule, and you should come to my Twitch streams and yell at me about how behind schedule I am. So I spent a long time filling in this background, really making it dark, really making the boards stand out against the windowsill that they're on. And you can see me going in now and adding in the inking to the boards, and you can really see the difference that it makes between the inked ones and the uninked ones. It really does make the illustration feel more complete, more final. But I also had to make sure that everything that was overlapping got a shadow, so I can put these boards in as much reality as they can be. So that is day 4, Dodge. And with that, we've completed the first 4 days of Inktober. My next video is going to go up on Saturday, and it's going to have the next 3 days. I'm very, very excited to show you guys what I've got. Again, if you want to buy the book, please go to my website, afterplagueart.shopify.com. The book is coming out on the 14th, and I would love, love, love for you to pick it up. And all of these illustrations will be available for purchase as prints in my shop as well. If you do get them, please, again, at me, send them to me. I want to see what you guys get. I really, truly do. Thank you so much for watching. I'm so excited to finally have my work be visible to you guys, because I've been hanging on to these all month long. And I'm so excited that you guys finally get to see them. If you want to see new illustrations before they come out on YouTube, go follow me on my other social media. I am Afterplague on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, Twitch, and I'm after_plague on Twitter. Thank you again so much for watching. Have a wonderful, wonderful spooky Inktober, and I will see you next time. I hope you survive this post-plague world. Bye!